The sun bled across the horizon like a dying ember, painting the desert sky in shades of copper and fire. Thomas Hale rode his weary horse through the open plains, the wind brushing against his face, whispering through the tall grass like a voice from the past. He had been gone for weeks, selling cattle in town, buying supplies, avoiding people. The silence of the frontier was all he trusted now. The war had taken his boy, the fever had taken his wife. Loneliness, he had decided, was the only thing that couldn't be taken from him. His small ranch sat on the edge of the Arizona territory, miles from the nearest settlement, where the land rolled out endlessly under the vast blue sky. The cabin was weathered, its roof patched with tin, the corral half broken, and yet it was home. As he guided his horse toward the canyon ridge, he felt that strange peace that came from solitude, the kind only men who had lost everything could understand. But that evening something shifted. Something foreign disturbed the stillness he'd grown used to. A shape lay in the dust near the river bend, half buried beneath the sun's last rays. At first, he thought it was a coyote or maybe a dead calf, but as he rode closer, the outline became clear. A human figure, small and still. His breath caught as he dismounted, boots crunching over dry earth. It was a young woman, Apache. Her face was cracked with dust, her lips blistered, and her hands tied cruelly with strips of rawhide. The desert had begun its slow work on her, but she was still breathing. Thomas knelt beside her, the dry heat pressing against his neck. Every story he'd ever heard echoed in his mind. Men hung for harboring Apaches, families burned for less. His hand hovered over the bindings, his instinct at war with his fear. But then she made a faint sound, barely a whisper, barely alive. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and defiant even in weakness. For a moment Thomas saw not a stranger, not an enemy, but a life begging for mercy. That was enough. With the blade from his belt, he cut through the rawhide and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than a sack of grain, bones sharp under skin that had seen too much sun. He placed her over his horse and turned toward the canyon trail that led home. The journey was long and silent, the only sound the soft creak of saddle leather and the whisper of wind. Night fell like a shroud by the time they reached the cabin. Inside, he laid her gently on the small bed near the hearth. The fire was low, the room filled with the smell of pine and dust. He fetched water, soaked a rag, and began cleaning the wounds on her wrists. Her skin was feverish. He poured a little water between her lips, whispering, "Easy now, you're safe." She didn't respond, but the rise of her chest grew steadier. For hours he worked, the rhythm of care soothing something in him he didn't know was broken. The next few days passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of coyotes. Thomas cooked broth, spooning it between her lips when she stirred. Sometimes she muttered in Apache, words he couldn't understand, but that sounded like prayers. He kept watch through the nights, listening to her breathing, wondering who had left her to die. Perhaps her tribe had turned on her. Perhaps the army had chased her down. He didn't ask, not yet. There was a fragility about her, like a wild thing caught between life and death. On the fifth morning, sunlight spilled across the cabin floor. Thomas sat in his chair, half asleep when he heard her voice, soft, dry, uncertain. "Where am I?" He turned to see her eyes open, dark as wet earth, studying him with suspicion. "You're in my cabin," he said gently. "Found you by the river. You were near gone." Her gaze flicked around the room. The wooden walls, the hanging lantern, the single rifle propped near the door. Her hand twitched, as if she expected a weapon pointed at her. But Thomas only handed her a cup of water. She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "Why?" she whispered. He paused before answering. "Because no one deserves to die like that." She looked away, jaw tightening. "My people, they left me." Her voice broke slightly, and Thomas said nothing. Some truths didn't need questioning. When she finally lay back down, exhaustion overtook her again. Before sleep claimed her, she murmured one word, "Tala." Her name drifted into the silence like a ghost. As the days warmed, so did the quiet between them. Tala spoke little, but her presence filled the cabin with something new: life. She gathered herbs by the river once she was strong enough to walk. She cooked with what little they had, humming songs Thomas didn't understand. In return, he mended her moccasins, taught her to feed the mare, and even smiled once or twice, though he didn't mean to. There was something about her calmness, fierce, grounded, that reminded him of everything he had lost. At night, she would sit by the fire, staring into the flames. Sometimes he caught her eyes reflecting the glow, deep and unreadable. He wanted to ask what had happened, why her tribe had left her, why her wrists bore those marks, but he didn't. Out here, pain was a private language. He understood that. So they shared silence instead, an understanding born not from words, but from survival. Two souls, both wounded by the land, finding quiet refuge in each other's company. One evening, as the storm winds swept through the canyon, Thomas fixed the shutters while Tala gathered the blankets. The thunder cracked, shaking the walls, and she startled, clutching her chest. Without thinking, he reached out, steadying her shoulder. She froze, eyes wide, then relaxed as he said softly, "You're safe here. I promise." The words hung in the air, fragile, real. For the first time in years, he realized he meant them. And maybe for the first time in her life, someone had said them and not lied. That night, when the storm passed, the air outside smelled of wet earth and pine. Thomas stepped out to check the horses, and when he returned, Tala was asleep by the fire, her face peaceful in the flickering light. He watched her for a long moment, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was: pity, gratitude, or something more dangerous. All he knew was that the silence no longer felt empty. It felt alive. By dawn, the sun rose golden over the valley, and the cabin seemed less lonely than it ever had. The world beyond those walls was still cruel, still divided by fear and blood. But here, inside that small wooden room, something human had begun to grow again. Thomas didn't know what the future held. Maybe she'd leave when her strength returned. Maybe men would come looking for her. But for now, the desert wind whispered softly through the pines, and he knew one thing for certain: loneliness had finally loosened its hold. The days grew warmer, the land breathing slowly after winter's grip faded. The grass along the ridges turned gold, and the sound of cattle bells echoed through the stillness. Tala had healed almost completely. Her skin, once pale with fever, now carried the color of the sun, and her eyes had softened from the constant shadow of fear. Thomas watched her often as she moved through the land, barefoot, unafraid. She had learned to live again, and somehow that made him feel alive too. The cabin, once hollow, now carried the rhythm of two hearts instead of one. She spent her mornings mending fences, her evenings singing to the horses, in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was low and steady, like a prayer woven into the wind. Sometimes she told him stories of the mountains her people once called sacred, of the eagles that carried the spirits of warriors, and the rivers that remembered every life they touched. Thomas would sit by the fire, listening in silence, realizing he hadn't heard such peace in years. Each word she spoke seemed to wash a bit of the dust off his soul. But peace never lasted long in the frontier. Rumors had a way of traveling faster than truth. One afternoon, while Thomas was repairing the corral, he saw dust clouds rising in the distance, riders, 5, maybe 6, coming from town. His stomach tightened. He knew what that meant. Someone had seen Tala fetching water near the creek, and tongues had started wagging. A rancher keeping an Indian girl, they'd say. Ain't right. By nightfall they would come. And in a land built on fear and pride, mercy was never welcome. He went inside quietly, finding Tala kneeling near the hearth, weaving a small cord from horsehair. She looked up when he entered, reading his expression before he even spoke. "They're coming," he said simply. Her hands stilled, her eyes steady. "How many?" "Enough," he replied. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the crackling fire. He handed her a small satchel with food and water. "You have to go north, follow the canyon. You'll find shelter by the river. Don't look back," but she didn't take it. "I will not run," she said. "Not again," Thomas sighed, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand. They won't just take you. They'll burn this place, kill me too." She stood, her eyes fierce. "You saved me when you had no reason. Now I save you." He shook his head, almost smiling. "You're stubborn as a mule." "So are you," she answered softly. For a moment, they stood there in the fading light, the space between them charged with everything they couldn't say. Then finally, Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "If they come, I'll hold them off. Promise me you'll run if I fall." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. When the night came, it came with fire. The glow of torches flickered on the horizon, and the sound of hoofbeats thundered across the dry earth. The riders spread out, shouting Thomas's name, demanding he come out. He stepped into the yard, rifle in hand, heart steady. "Evening, boys," he called. "Ain't no one here but me." The leader, a thick man with a red beard and a whiskey snarl, spat in the dirt. "You lying, Hale. We heard tell you're keeping a squaw here." Thomas met his gaze. "Ain't your business who I keep." The man's eyes darkened. "Then I'll make it my business." The first gunshot tore through the night like thunder. Thomas fired back, hitting one man's hat clean off his head. The others fanned out, shooting from behind fence posts and boulders. Sparks flew as bullets struck the metal trough. The horses screamed, the night alive with chaos. Inside the cabin, Tala crouched by the window, gripping the small rifle he'd given her weeks before. She wanted to run to him, but his words echoed in her mind. "If I fall." She bit her lip until it bled, tears cutting lines through the dust on her cheeks. The fight didn't last long. 5 against 1 never did. But Thomas made every shot count. 2 men fell before they reached the porch. Another turned tail and rode off into the dark. The leader advanced, torch in hand, shouting curses. Thomas fired. The bullet struck true, but too late. The torch flew through the air, landing on the roof. Flames caught fast, climbing up the old boards like hungry tongues. Thomas stumbled, a shot grazing his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, breath ragged. He could smell the burning pine, the death in the air. He whispered, "Go, Tala, go." When the smoke cleared hours later, the night was silent again. The men were gone, leaving behind only ashes and blood. From the hills, Tala came running down, her heart pounding in her chest. She found him by the corral, lying on his back, staring at the stars. "Thomas," she gasped, kneeling beside him. His shirt was soaked through with blood, his face pale. He looked at her and smiled faintly. "Told you to run." She shook her head, tears falling. Why save me when it cost you everything?" His voice was a whisper now. "Because you reminded me how to care again." She held his hand until his breathing slowed. The dawn crept over the horizon, washing the sky in rose and gold. Birds began to sing, the first sound of morning. When the sun finally rose, Thomas Hale was gone. Tala sat beside him until the wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and ash. Then she dug a grave beneath the old oak tree, the one that shaded the corral. She marked it with a simple cross made from broken fencewood. When she stood again, she whispered something in Apache. A prayer, a promise, a goodbye. In the years that followed, travelers passing through the valley spoke of a woman who lived alone among the hills, dark-haired, quiet, always watching the horizon. They said she never harmed a soul, though she carried a rifle and rode like a ghost. Children whispered that her spirit guarded the land, that no one dared steal cattle or burn grass within her sight. The small ranch remained standing, repaired, tended, alive. And though no man knew her name, they called her the keeper of Hale Ranch. Those who rode close enough sometimes swore they saw her at dusk, kneeling by a simple grave beneath an oak tree, whispering softly to the wind. And when the desert storms came, the wind carried her voice across the plains, not sorrowful but strong, like the echo of a love the world never understood. It was said that her laughter sometimes followed thunder, her song riding on the rain. And so the legend spread, not of vengeance or war, but of a quiet man who found redemption in the eyes of an Apache girl and a woman who never forgot him.